Start the recording. Okay. So yeah, to kick off the meeting, the catalog API, we're going back and forth on this, and Jimmy Zielinski, he chimed in on the issue that I said something on this past week about the removal of it, and it's I guess it's contentious because there are a few people using it that probably shouldn't be using it, but it's one of those like almost no take backseat type things that now that I've heard discussion about and have even supported removing it because it's tedious and it should be implemented better. And all the registry implementers say that it's an expensive API call. Like it basically crashes the registry to have to traverse the full listing of what's in the registry. That they wish there was an alternative to it, but that even the mention of removing it has caused some people to be like, well, I guess I'm not going to be going with the OCI distribution spec. I'll just stick with Docker V2 Schema 2 so that I can make sure there's a catalog API call because they've already written to that. And it's kind of like the no take backseat rule of open source. So I'm kind of two ways about it. It's one of those that would love to just axe and see gone. But there's, even if we create new listing APIs and effectively deprecate catalog or find some way to life cycle it, the adoption will be sparse if it's not effectively a drop-in replacement. So I'm kind of like, I guess I'm saying I'm two ways about it. And having heard a few people express that they were disinterested in any kind of open standards and will just stick with what they've got because of the catalog API, the catalog endpoint being there, was my motivation for respurring the conversation. It was not just to find a needless piece of thread to work on, unraveling a conversation. So yeah, that's the position. And Lasker, you immediately said you'd like to chat about it this week, but I'll yield the floor to you.
Well, I get that people use it. Like in fact, we ourselves implemented it. What I'm struggling a bit is, since not everybody has implemented it, putting it in the spec almost says like we must. Or what I'm kind of missing, what seems fairly obvious, is we can all implement something that isn't in the spec. Mm-hmm. And in this case, we say, well, having catalog API in the spec isn't proving that valid because many haven't. It's got some difficulties for various registries to implement because of the assumptions around namespaces and others. So what's the downside by saying we're going to remove it from the spec? That doesn't mean we're removing it from any of the implementations. And when we come in with a new one, then we would hopefully be at a point where everybody does agree that it is a replacement and it would be implemented consistently. So my struggle is, if we leave it in the spec, then we're going to have a bunch of registries that are just not going to be spec compliant. And they're going to have very valid arguments why they're not spec compliant. Mm-hmm. If we move from the spec, let them keep the API, including us, and let's work on a new one without, worry about this elephant in the room. And there's no real good standard on the catalog API. I mean, the fact that even the scanning companies, the ones that have actually implemented the catalog API have implemented slightly differently because of the complexities of it. So every one of the scanners that have implemented across our various clouds and distribution, have had to put nuances in. If AWS, do this. If ACR, do this. If Google does this. So I'm struggling on what's the value of keeping it in the spec when clearly not all of us have implemented it, certainly consistently.
Okay. That is, so it is completely correct that just having it, it not being in the spec doesn't mean that you can't implement it. Um,
Yeah,
I
I
guess.
also second
Yeah,
that
go ahead.
idea that this is a really good opportunity that someone, some group, some person, whatever, someone with a better idea can implement it and then slowly kind of get adoption, get support. And that says nothing that like you still can't have the catalog endpoint. I see it more as an opportunity to kind of develop something new and better, but not like break everyone that's potentially using it. But again, that doesn't really say much about it being or not being in the spec.
I mean, I would see a good argument that we should not mandate it, but it should be effectively, at the very least, reserved as an endpoint, and I would hope at least described in terms of like, if you implement this, here's what it should look like. But on the other hand, that's just like adding craft from day one.
Yeah.
But I think,
And I could see totally putting in the spec that the underscore catalog API is reserved for backwards compatibility. And anything new that we do, and unfortunately I was pinging Michael Brown being the wrong one. So he's now Michael Brown AWS to clarify, thank you. I offered if we can get him a hat, would he be able to step in, but I'm not sure if that'll work. Anyway, the point is that we should, anything new we do, we should absolutely make sure it doesn't sit on top of that one, because we obviously would do it differently because the current one didn't work as expected. Wasn't work as intended or even designed to be used for this scenario. So I'd be all in on putting in the spec that underscore catalog is reserved for backwards compatibility, and put pointers to the old Docker distribution spec to say, if you want to implement it, go there. But if you are implementing something from scratch, please come over here to this other link and help us get a new API that we all believe in complete, which I acknowledge we haven't made progress on. So and I will plead guilty on that one as I try to wrap things up. And we still have a goal at KubeCon. We'd like to have a meeting and discuss it. So I will reach out to the other Michael Brown and see what we can do about getting more progress on that.
I'm just curious, does anyone know if it was implemented with the underscore as a message that this is a sort of template, temporary thing? It seems different.
Yeah.
I have a feeling it was meant to be internal. Yeah.
Yep. It was literally one of those no take backsies from day one, is that it was added effectively to be a back-end system API and not to be used from the front like clients, but it should have been in a separate spec somewhere else, and people started using it or expecting it.
Well, we're using it because we all need one. It's just a matter of did it match our individual cloud, configurations and scenarios. We disabled it on MCR for a bit because we didn't have it set up for the scalability that MCR gets queried on, which is the same problem that Docker Hub has. So we wound up putting an index in it and fixed all that because we had such a high demand. So it's definitely a need. Unfortunately, the implementation doesn't match the need. So I guess I'm just struggling with. I really am struggling on what's the simplicity of just saying, look, we're going to not put it in the spec. We'll put it in reserved. Everybody, people that are using it, keep using it, but let's work on the new one and run forward.
So the distribution spec issue number 22, John Johnson had two comments where he starts to lay out a listing API that I feel like could be made into a doc, and looks like a couple of other people have asked for a few clarifications on it, but this is the most of the thread that I would see it if this could go from a terrible GitHub conversation into a more readable document as a place to actually tease out the requirements of what a listing would be. Yes, I'm not keen on having cruft from day one. I'm just also not keen on completely leaving it up in the air until something hopefully is done as a replacement. But like purely an API agreed upon of what would be listing, and then some folks taking action to like add it to the open source registries or whatever, like start playing with how that, how feasible it is. Because having like you said, Steve, a more approachable and agreed upon listing and not the terrible catalog API would even make more of a suitable vendor playground. And I think that was even Jimmy Zielinski's point, is that right now it's not been very suitable for vendors or various toolings like scanners to work with,
right,
because it does thrash the registries. And even like one of the cases, like the Flatpak folks piped up that they rely upon it, but they dislike the catalog API. It's not reliable. But like Flatpak needs it so they can discover various images and then inquire those images for metadata that they might have, because they store a lot in like annotations.
But we're not debating the need for an API.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is let's decouple the two. Let's put the catalog, the underscore catalog as a reserved word and not have it as a definition in the spec. And, obviously not send, cease and desist orders to those that have implemented it and leave it alone. And the ones that haven't implemented it, but the ones that haven't implemented it implement something else. And John, maybe he can remind me what Google did. I thought Google did a different API altogether to enable this scenario.
Oh, he's on the call. Cool.
Yeah, I saw him typing. I don't know if he doesn't have a mic or can't talk, but I would love to let's just literally just put that away and focused. Couldn't get a room. Okay. Tuck that aside and literally work on, the new one. And, the one that John had put an issue on was a great conversation to start. I think that's what we used as the basis for what Mike had proposed we have a working group around.
I want to say that I think I would be in favor of having something, mainly because I feel a little bit strange about having a distribution spec that like doesn't have a way to search things, especially when you think about it. I mean, at that point, it's just another way of pushing blobs onto a server. I mean, without a search API, it's a little bit strange to have a 1.0 that's so bare bones. And I mean, we've had that problem across other OCI specs of like, we'll delay till later and then later never comes. So, yeah.
I guess all I'm asking is, unless we think the underscore catalog API can be fixed, which I don't believe anybody believes it can be, I don't understand the leave it in, which nobody's going to change their implementation, versus leave it as reserved and close this issue and move on to the new one. Unless look, we're not thinking we're going to finish up the catalog as the distribution spec until the end of the year, I think is what Vincent said. So maybe we just defer this and we do focus on the new listing API to see if we can make progress. Maybe that's just the right answer, because nobody's going to change anything between now and the end of the year is my assumption, to run off and implement the current catalog API.
Yeah, I think the implication is that if we don't remove it and someone new comes along and then wants to use it, there's more risk in them implementing something that is probably most likely going to go away, as opposed to just waiting a little bit for the better thing that will be more robust into the future.
I don't believe that the reference implementation has an implementation for catalog API. I believe we all had to implement it ourselves.
Really? It's not in the Docker registry image?
I don't remember. I'd have to ask Sajay or somebody on my team.
That's kind
Anyway, maybe do we want to just tuck this, just because I'd rather be spending this time actually working on the design, which unfortunately we can't do at this meeting. There's other things we could talk about. Do we want to just, I guess I defer to you, Vincent, as being the one with the gavel. Do we just leave this as a placeholder for now and see if we can make progress, and in 3 months we revisit? Because again, nobody's arguing we want to finish the catalog API. We're focused on a new one that is the right scenarios, the right capabilities, the right granularity for namespace-based repos versus domain-space repos is one of the complexities that follows RBAC as well, because that's part of the. It's not just a perf, because those of us that did implement it, we did implement some type of indexing behind it. There's RBAC issues as well, because obviously I don't want to see somebody else's images that I don't have access to.
Yep. There are handlers for it in the. I'm just double checking that. I found that interesting about that catalog. Anyhow, so
Thanks, John.
me with the gavel. Terrible place to be. The new listing API discussion, I think, is literally the next item up on the agenda. So, okay. So I mean, I'm game for being persuaded. I think Alexa just said my concern with why I knocked or rejected my own support of removing it right away is that I guess it's just the concern that we remove it and that the listing API takes forever because people will debate about it or haven't quite implemented or put their hands on an implementation and the benefits and drawbacks of it, like a solid client use case and a solid server implementation, and could actually work through to say, this is what we found, and it actually has severe performance implications or whatever, or severe, like you said, access control implications. That's pretty much the concern, is the devil you know versus the devil you don't. So in that way is largely my concern. I'm not beyond being persuaded to just remove it. And removing it and working on the listing API. I do see that most of the conversation is already there. It's probably literally just in the hands of somebody who has their hands on a actual client and use case and a server side implementation. Even if it is the Docker distribution registry code as a reference implementation. I don't know how many people are actually committing to those places right now, but that's pretty much where it's at. Like the concern that it would be lingering, and that linger would cause linger without actual hands-on proof of concept and experience or traction to a particular implementation that we can work through, would cause it to just not happen. And then it would continue to like skew based on like one team implemented one thing and another company implemented another, and they just stick with what they got, which maybe that's an okay approach. It's just not going to actually foster any adoption. It'll make life harder on security scanners and new tools in the future. As for using the time of this meeting, that's literally up to the nature of the call. I'm not opposed to opening up a doc and trying to see the conversation come together live. That's not always a good use of time, but ad hoc, especially in an interrupt-driven world, ad hoc collaboration on this kind of stuff does not always happen efficiently. So punting it will probably just mean that we're talking about it again like this in a few weeks.
Well, unfortunately, Michael isn't here. Atlas is here. The other Michael, sorry.
Mike. So Mike Brown from IBM.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Because we kind of anointed him as the leader on it, with Atlas and myself being core of the working group. Of course, all the others had your own name there. We took a half an hour just for this one. Maybe we make more progress, to your point, on the doc, and then bring it back with a more scoped conversation, because I think we were in the the explore phase of the things, and then we have to kind of scope it back. I think not having this entire group taken on that journey is probably other than those that want to opt in, can. So that's what I would probably suggest at this point. I just want to suggest that the meeting. Sorry, I would like to get a meeting at KubeCon, just because it's while these calls aren't necessarily as effective, I think being an in-person, in-room sketching on something is really productive, even if it's a napkin, as opposed to always just iterating on a hacked MD or a spec, and then we could bring those dynamic conversations back to the group, and that would be my hope.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that one thing that I think that we could do better across all of OCI actually is handling the problem of actually coming up with a community consensus on something. Because, I mean, if we look at a lot of the stuff that we want to change within OCI, there are plenty of examples of this. There isn't really an obvious process for like, here is what the community's decided on, then we put it in OCI. We're still sort of not very good at all of that. I think most people would agree that most of the changes that have gone through OCI have been like, the blessed implementation has it, or rather we came up with it in the blessed implementation, then moved it over to the spec. So I think it will be nice to sketch out a way of doing that as well. Because with some of the changes we want.
As a contributor, I would really like to see some solid examples for what projects or points have been contributed and have successfully gone through. I can kind of imagine the scenarios in my head, but when push comes to shove, I keep having sort of an idea of what it needs to contribute, and then it looks like something different. And if you're a new person, it's not totally, and you just see, for example, this video that's going to be on YouTube or whatnot with all of us talking, it's not totally clear, like, who are the people here and why are we here and how do we actually sort of get things done? Because from a layperson's point of view, it feels like there's a lot of talking about things, but it's not clear what is the actual path to, like, here's an idea and now here it's like implemented in the wild. So I guess I should make a constructive suggestion for what we could do. Thinking, how about to start, it would be really nice to see, like, from the start of OCI to this point, what ideas, initiatives, entire projects have been successful. How can we just make like a list of those things that we can then share with people? Any ideas?
I have a bad feeling that radio sounds will follow. Yeah, go on.
No, that, I mean, I mean, to some extent, several folks on this call are already doing some of that with, like, the Deus Labs having the ORAS tool just to experiment with pushing and pulling different MIME types, and those kind of implementations. There's just in the past, some of those tools either fit a very specific use case. So, like, okay, so for like the image and runtime spec, there's a number of tools that did implement the runtime side of it, but to Alexa's point, there was still kind of this implicit, the de facto implementation or the reference implementation did it a certain way. So those tools could read through the spec, the runtime spec, and, you know, whether they're Kata containers or Railcar or CRun or gvisor, Nabla, whatever, there's a list of those tools, and they would read the spec, but then they would also try and implement bug for bug compatible with the behavior of run C. And it was because they each solved a specific use case, but they had to be able to be dropped in place and used. They had to have some level of conformance to what the behavior people expected from run C to an extent. more recently, like Scopio did a certain thing with the registry in image format, and people used it. It wasn't just an academic, like, look at how I did a thing. It was more like I need to be able to remote inspect images or copy it to disk without a daemon running, and it's like it got adoption for that use case. Emoji did this, Alexa's tool, but more recently, I could see things like the Deus Labs ORAS finding one of those use cases, not just being here's how to abuse a registry, but here's how to do a thing, a very specific use case. And even some of the tools that I've heard you talk about with when you were showing some of the examples you'd written in and around container diffing, those kind of tools, and will they end up blending, or will it blend, or will it just be an example of how to do something? That was always what Tom would tell. There was a lot of tools, I'm sure I'm not remembering, but the ones that solved a specific use case, and they were using what we were talking about actively in the meetings to solve that use case. Some of those are still around and still being used, because they actually needed it to solve a certain use case. The other ones are just lost to the annals of time of helping foster a conversation.
I might add, just being the one that's relatively new to the group and how we were trying to add some stuff. The whole artifact stuff. For me, trying to get engaged with the group, because we had this idea, we wanted to go with it. We had some experience with trying to do Helm as a one-off in registries, and like, this sucks, we want to make it better. There was a process by not understanding what the engagement model was, to your point, Vanessa. And I think I struggled on how to figure out how to engage with the team, and only because of persistence did I figure it out. I'm sure working at Azure helped a little bit for people to continue to pay attention when it seemed like I was being really annoying about something. So I was able to navigate and figure that out. And the thing that I was trying to understand is, here's an idea, where does it fit? And then wasn't necessarily expectation, hey, take my PR on the spec or even code. It's, how does the group think about this so that we can now go off and work on it? And that's kind of the phase we're in now. And that's kind of where I was going to bring up on the artifact registry update is, we have a pretty good structure of how we're doing. We've had a lot of conversations on how to work with the team, and where's the agreed upon space, and then where's the tenacious space. Like, we know index is still, a very contentious space to figure out how to solve. But we can do a playground and figure out in this one area, let's just call it at the actual image instead of the index. And we've got the ORAS library, which we're iterating on. We've got Singularity now supported as another format. Thank you for your help on it. So we're really excited about that. So now we're validating it, and I feel like we're building up enough momentum that we can come back and readdress, for instance, the index one, because like, we had a lot of agreement at the artifact level, at the image level. We had a lot of contention at the index. So let's build some consensus, build consensus and build some experience and build some specific cases. And now we can go on, take the more contentious one, and hopefully the use case that we proved in one will help justify the other. That's
so
one example.
If you're at a company and you're working on a registry or some cool sort of arm off of OCI, is there any means for you to reach back to people in the OCI community and say, hey, I'm working on this really cool thing. Are there people that want to help or that can help test or basically do anything? So for example, could me as a contributor and someone who's interested in containers who listens to the OCI, is there any way that I would be able to help or contribute to what you're working on, or is it more of a closed internal company thing? Because that could be a way to help engagement with the OCI.
Yeah. So for me, this was one of the motivations that I felt with doing the Slack stuff, is by moving to Slack and having these separate channels, it allowed us to work in the same building as others, but just, you know, having our own rooms, but there's like the hallway and the cafeteria that everybody could kind of navigate in. That was my very abstract way of thinking about the Slack stuff. Is we can, you know, I could DM somebody like, hey, we're having this conversation if they're not not focused on it, but at least we're in the same area. I struggled with the other thing that just drew a blank. That was my suggestion. That was my proposal on how we do that, and I'm hoping everything from the artifact stuff we've got as a Slack channel there to even this catalog listing, assuming we spend the time and actually work on it, that we can have those discussions off to the side, but still in the same body that, you know, others can be visible to. Because just having something off in some random GitHub, you know, that's just a piece of sand in the desert. You know, there's way too many of them.
I think it'd be nice if we had like working groups for particular projects. I think it would also help with some other aspects of trying to get consensus on things. But I think that, yeah, there is definitely some work to be done.
I love that idea. I love delegation. And I'm keen to figure out what it means for delegating something like the API, the listing API. Okay, we'll continue to pick on that, and have some kind of a working group, set some kind of an expectation that what that group arrives at will be, and this is not far from being just maintainers of a distribution spec, but particularly for like an effort like that, that the results could be presented in some kind of a timeline. There'd be a request for comment period that's not just an ongoing like slog of GitHub issues, but like an actual, here's the proposal, here's a request for comment period. And then some kind of like on a call like this, which maybe we should switch back to every 2-week call, since it's about what we've averaged here lately. But on some kind of call like this, the agenda item would be review that working group's discovery, and then like go ahead and like merge it, like some way to like break down the process of it being maintainer driven, or kind of like people feeling not empowered. However, we need to get past that so that folks that want to focus on some particular working group type thing can go off, do that, and then feel empowered with the results that they find. And maybe even like if as you're experimenting with it, like here's the projects we added it to, here's what we considered, the use cases, here's what we think the performance implications would be, ACLs, whatever. I think that's perfect.
From the catalog one, I'll just use that as an example. I think, as you mentioned, the process where we failed is we didn't actually set some timeline, and we're not actively running to any timeline, for certainly more aggressive than nothing. So I think setting an expectation of, hey, we agree we want to go do this. What's the timeline on it? Let's make sure we're following up on a regular basis. And if we're not, what does that mean? Is it really not that important? Is it, whatever the reasons are. For me, I've just been super busy, and but the same token, we're not blocked because we did implement the catalog one for now, and it's not right, it's not great. We were able to work around its current limitations. So, but where the artifact registry stuff, we are blocked by that. I am making progress on that. So that's an example, and there is a set of people working on it. We're not really discussing it here per se, but the ORAS stuff we've been working on, the CNAP conversations have been continuing on that. So I think part of it is there's probably more regular engagement when there's active development going on, where I think right now a bunch of us are trying to spend free time trying to make some progress on this. So I wonder. but I think this is a good, healthy conversation because I think we, obviously the email thread leading up to this kind of was a flash spot of that kind of frustration.
Do you want to cover something particularly on the artifact registry update? Because I'd also like to hear from Alexa. I guess it was you that added the new hooks runtime.
I can just do a real quick update, and just that we've been taking the work that for the agreement that we've had to date of using the image config media type and continue to iterate that. We've been working on the Helm 3 stuff, which I believe all that stuff got checked in by Josh. We've got the Singularity stuff, which we announced and we have working. That is all working, with the agreement that we've made to date on using the media type. The CNAB conversation has come back around, and I'm seeing more active conversation. There was a call this morning on it, which that one is going to tease at the index challenge that we have, because we don't have a way to define these things at an index. I still have I've taken the onus of coming back and taking the stuff I did for the image spec, the PR I did there, and putting it on distribution spec, and coming up with some of the other things that we've talked about is how do you get a new media type in, and how do you discover what media types are in a distribution. I've been accepted as a reject for the pre-con of KubeCon. So I do have a session there that I've been working on, and as I work through the presentation, I'm trying to identify some of the stuff like Vanessa was mentioning, like how does somebody understand how this works? Like how does somebody ramp up? So I'm hoping that will flush out the details of what I want to submit as a PR to the image, to the distribution spec. So that's the main progress there. Is Singularity is on board there. That's a huge success. Helm 3 is moving forward. That'll be a success. And CNAB is making progress on it.
Is that something that we, or in your conversations, have? Did we go any further on how registries would do any kind of a handshake, or say that they do whitelist or blacklist certain media types, or that they filter? Did that conversation? I don't remember hearing the rest of that.
We haven't finalized it, to your point, and honestly, I think we're still debating it. Even Jimmy and I, as being the two registries that have kind of already been experimenting with this, we've both seen the other side. Blocking it by default helps you be really clear about what you support, but making it super easy to add a new one is important. Otherwise, people will just jack something into to whatever they can find, because they can just get it in, don't care. So I don't know if we've solidified that one. Honestly, I find that one fairly minimal, only because I think we've come up with the fact that we use the media type in such a way that it's just a string mapping with a couple of icons and a couple other things. It's I think we've come up with a pretty simple way for registries to support a new type. So I feel, and then it's just, I don't know whether we'll put in the spec whether everybody must support new types one way or the other. I think that's a minor detail that will all flush out as we get the details done and what does it mean to add a new one. But I think the general model, from what I've seen, the fact that we're able to do it with Helm, then Singularity, and then we're just, are two that help at the image layer. In other words, not index, but the image one. And then the one that you've been working on, honestly, on the, I forget how to summarize it, but basically being able to declare what's in a package is another interesting angle I hadn't thought of.
Yeah, source code contents, and that's something that a lot of people are interested, but also Nisha that's on the call is interested in that as well, like adding self-expressing data or self-introspecting data to the container.
The interesting one about that is it takes again, it is in the sense that I think you were proposing another layer to an existing image, Docker image type, for instance. So that's an interesting dimension to think about.
Sorry, Vincent, are you saying that we finally might have a bill of materials for container images?
That's been a hot topic for the last month or so. Nisha has Were you at that KubeCon? No, I don't
Me?
think you were.
No.
So she actually held a pretty.
Hi. Okay, no, I'm here.
Oh, yes, cool.
Yeah,
But Nisha
yeah,
had a,
sorry.
had a talk at KubeCon that fostered a lot of conversation around it, and since then, it's come up here a number of times.
So, hi.
Hello.
Yeah, hi. Okay, sorry.
Hi.
Yeah, so as far as I can see, this layer of this extra layer of information, it seems a little hard to stuff into the current spec. And my understanding is that you can do some. I mean, there is some level of declaration that you can do, but the way that containers do like get reused, it can quickly bloat up. So my feeling is that a lot of these concerns might be able to be addressed in the OCI v2 spec. But I believe Alexa is still thinking about it, and I'm certainly interested in like.
No,
Sorry, go ahead.
yes, we should definitely chat. Yep, we should definitely chat about it. Yeah, because I was hoping that there would be that someone would have an idea of how to get a bill of materials to work with the OCI stuff I was discussing, because yeah, one of the main things that has bothered me about container images for the past like 5 years is the fact that we've gone backwards in terms of like people used to know what's installed in their machines, now they don't anymore. So it'd be really nice to be able to fix that problem. So we should definitely chat about it. And back to the discussion of a lack of concrete timelines. Yeah.
Can I interject on the bill of materials for 1 second?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Just as an FYI, my day job, I work on Grapheus, which is a container metadata open source project. And one of the things that's in there is a bill of materials, like what's installed in your container. And so it may be interesting to go look at what's there and talk to them about it. Not that you necessarily have to use their stuff, but just another thing in the space.
Yeah, the Grapheus had come up a while ago, and I think it got backburnered by a few folks, but I haven't checked on it in a while.
So the trouble with container images is that because they get reused and because they're opaque, whatever information, there's no place in the container image itself where you can go and grep for or query or inspect that kind of information. And I suppose that's just the nature of the way that they're packaged or the way that they're built in the first place. I am actually not sure about those kind of mechanics, and I still need some time to evaluate all of the tools that are available and maybe put together something that might be a proof of concept of what this would look like. But what I see is that the initial thing is that during the build process, there's no way to like stop mid-build, check mid-build, produce data, and then continue. It's just pick it up, and here you go. Here's your image.
I think that you can internal to the container that is able to provide that functionality and to also provide an entry point that would then let you to sort of inspect and any kind of metadata that you want. And that doesn't necessarily have to be part of, for example, it doesn't have to be like part of the container itself. It could be something that someone chooses to install. And then say, of course, then are people actually going to install it? I think it comes down to having to develop some kind of software and then prove that it's useful to people and that it works. And then making it a suggestion. I mean, I'm not sure about that. it's a fine line when you can't force people to do anything. I don't think you want to, I don't know. To me, it doesn't feel like making a specification for this is how all containers must serve this particular metadata. It feels like too much hard coding. It feels like there should be options of software that can achieve this goal, but not sort of enforced. If that makes sense.
I mean, I would suggest, so there is a way, so currently there is a place you could stash away such information, which is on like the annotation of basically the descriptors of like when it points to the layers, but that would be an awful idea, mainly because as far as I know, like no tools actually touch that, mainly because nobody else uses it. So ultimately, yeah, it's not really doable at the moment. I would argue, sorry, there was someone knocking on my door. I would argue that effectively my idea for how this sort of thing should work is that you would be able to get, so with regards to getting a bill of materials in terms of like in the middle of a build process, I mean, it depends what build you use. For instance, on the OpenSUSE side, when we build container images right now, we do have a bill of materials. It's necessary in order for OBS to do automated rebuilds. So this, like, the idea is already exists for some people. It's just a matter of seeing how we can at least show the benefits of it to folks. One thing we could do, I mean, if we had bills of materials that were signed, you could then use it to say, I verify that this image contains these packages from upstream, and it wasn't messed with in any way. And if we had more transparent images, then you could also say, these are the files which are not part of a signed package in this image. And then people want to say, oh, well, if I sign all of the stuff that I install, let's not say it's a package, let's say it's a whatever, then I will be able to detect whether or not something is in my image that's unsigned, regardless of whether or not I've signed the entire thing, effectively. I think that some folks would find use in that. Now, unfortunately, the only way for that to be usable is that you have to have all of the lines in the chain actually have signing these bills of materials and so on. But I think there definitely is an argument to be made that there is a use case for it. I mean, I know that most institutions would jump at the idea to be able to say, to give more security to users in this way. So it's sort of down to what sort of tooling we can come up with. Unfortunately, I think that the scanning approach to images is quite intricate. It's quite complicated to get right, and I think that the problem is that the scanning approach is the only one that will work with all images. So we'll have to think about it a bit more. I mean, in the case of OpenSUSE, we actually use the distribution tool itself on the container router first to figure out what it has installed. But that's not ideal.
Yeah. So I mean, if you were to use, if you were to use, it's past 3. So we can talk about this later. I mean, it definitely is like it gets really complicated really quickly. And if you're just using like the base layer, you can use tools like ODB or even Yocto to build your base layer, and you know exactly what's in the container. But once people start, reusing containers to build like some higher levels of abstraction, then it becomes harder and harder to track.
So I might suggest this is a perfect example of breaking something off to the side, create a Slack channel and continue the conversation. And then if there's anything that's blocking making progress, because like from a artifact registry perspective, I love this because it's yet another, it's not a copy of one of the ones we've already done, so it doesn't really test anything. This is testing something new on where do you put this information, because this isn't a new artifact, this is adding information to an existing type, the document image. So this is like one that I would not drive, but I would watch, from the back and kind of, poke in on some things and then let others drive, and then I keep on kind of asking questions and learning. So back to the initial question that Vanessa asked was, how do we iterate on new things in this working group? This seems like a perfect one.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with that, we are over time. I would encourage that conversation to continue because it is no doubt an important one we've talked about for years, and I do think is also we've gone backwards in our features over time with containers as far as bill of materials goes. We are past time.
Best to drink some water. He's been walking for a while now.
Yeah, I walked. It's hard.
And so, yeah. I'll post the video here shortly, and everybody's encouraged to continue adding to the notes anything that particular that you have or action items. Steve, you even said something about the artifact update that you had an action in mind. I just did not catch it.
Yeah, I'll add some notes and I'll ping out to Mike Brown from IBM to see what we can do about some next steps.
Yeah, and Alexa, you joined early in the morning and did not get a hooks update, but it looks like you might largely be the only person from that side of the conversation on the call also.
That's totally fine. I'll bring it up next time, or at least I'll post it next time. We'll see if I wake up on time. But yeah, effectively, I would like to see us getting that done so we can finally 1.0 run C and get that part of our lives over.
Yeah, it looks like there's been some good back and forth on the issue though, that the folks from NVIDIA and you're making changes and they're amending it. So hopefully we'll arrive at something that is decent.
Yeah.
So, okay. Thank you everybody for joining. I will see you online.
Thanks everyone.
Happy hacking.
Yeah.